www.ccpg.org. At this point, we will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody would join me in that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. At this point, we enter the public comment section of the meeting. The board will now allow any individual to share public comment for up to 3 minutes. Such comments should not include discussion of personnel matters, which should be brought directly to the attention of the appropriate school official. During public comment, the board administration listen to comments but may not respond to the public. Okay, Mike, do we have anybody waiting to make a comment?
There are no public comments.
Cara, have we received any written public comments?
No public comment.
Thank you. At this point, we'll move into our discussion and the reason for our meeting this morning, the 2021-2022 budget preparation discussion. Mike, which?
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a slightly snowy Saturday. What we had envisioned conversation to be in November when we really started planning it, I think it is maybe slightly altered a little bit because in the ensuing months, we've gotten a little bit better of an idea of what we're likely to experience next year in terms of our budget position. We obviously do not have a lot of new information as it relates to state funding as we're looking at our revenue projections, but we do know that we are receiving an infusion of federal dollars due to the stimulus that was passed in December. And while those allocations have not been completely finalized yet, the initial allocation for our district is on the order of 4.1 million. And so that is significantly higher than even the CARES Act stimulus that we received earlier in the spring. So that coupled with other predicting and studying that Michael has done, and the promise of additional federal funds that will likely be coming to both us and the states with the new administration taking office and the control of the Senate changing hands brightens to some extent the picture that we are heading into for next year potentially. But as anything, we need to be ready for all contingencies. So we wanted to make sure we had this opportunity to have this conversation with the full board as we head into, in earnest, our budget planning for next year. So with that, Michael has put together a presentation that takes us through a number of different informational items. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and then from there we can just get into some open discussion.
There we go. I have shared my screen. Let me know if you can all see it.
Yeah.
And it's the budget presentation that we had for today.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Sometimes I'm technologically challenged, so I figured I would make sure that we're all on the right page here. So thanks for joining us today. As Dr. Connolly said, today is really about FY22 budget planning and priorities and figuring out what our direction is to go ahead and advance the education program. And one of the things he will talk about later is how next year is going to be a recovery year. We're really trying to make sure students get everything they need so that we can catch up, hopefully to the point that we should be at and move forward. So one of the things that we felt in order to have this discussion, because obviously we know that it could take another year of budgeting like we've had this year where we project a deficit and then, hopefully play out so that it either is right on point or not nearly as bad and maybe even a balanced budget. But we wanted to make sure that we knew where we were and how we got here so that the board had confidence in giving us direction if that ask is to go ahead and have a second year of projected deficit spending. And I use the word projected because I know you've all looked at the projections, and hopefully this year will not end up being a deficit. So I think an important place to start is the FY19 audit. And the reason I say that is even though that was closed out, as you know, we hired new auditors after an RFP. And our new auditors, during even the RFP selection process, had pointed out that it looked like there was something amiss about a couple areas of our FY19 audit. So when they were hired, we charged them with the act of going ahead and reviewing that FY19 audit. And obviously, as you see, we have some really good news. There were a couple of items that were pretty substantially underreported or misreported on the audit that caused for a restatement to be made. And so a restatement is just a revision of the previous financial statements to correct an error. It doesn't always end up being a positive, but in our case, it's a huge positive. As you can see, we had a payroll deduction liability, which was the pooling of the premiums for insurance, and they should have been closed out each year to go ahead and transfer those into a cash asset and fund balance. But for some reason, they were being rolled as though we owed that money. And as you can see, that was about $7.6 million to the positive for the district that was sitting in a restricted fund, essentially saying it needed to be used for health premiums and payments, and yet those had been closed out. So that became fund balance for us. And then property tax collections were not being booked appropriately with regards to how we do accrual basis financing or funding. And so that was another $2 million that came to us in a positive. There were some minor adjustments on the negative. There were about $330,000 in actual healthcare expenses that were to be paid. There was another about $500,000 in property tax bookings that were refunds that had to be figured into the mix. So that's how we get to $8.7 million increase in fund balance at the end of FY19 to our fund balances that we had, meaning that we were almost $9 million better in fund balance and operating funds going into FY20. So we started, not knowing it, but we started at a much better position in FY20. As we go on to, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt, raise a hand. I know that this is pretty heady stuff, and we're going to see some of this in finance next week when the audit gets presented. But this is a good preview based on what we're doing here today. So then we go into FY20, and obviously,
excuse me, Mike.
Yes.
I had a question. Looks like Stacy has one also. This restatement and changing specifically how we're booking what we thought was a liability. How is that going to impact us, not just for this year, but is that going to be an impact on our 5 years going forward? Is that changing how we're going to do business?
That's a great question, Bill. So the property tax, obviously, that will year over year, depending on what collections are at. And that's the important thing, because we project, and you'll see that later going forward for the next few years, we're going to give back more in refunds than we historically give back because of businesses claiming vacant property, homeowners claiming, that they're overassessed. So we're gonna give back some dollars in the future years. So we'll have to see what that looks like. So we're not going to see a $2 million increase every year, but now that we've adjusted it, we will have more accurately reflected our property tax collection as it relates to fund balance moving forward. So as the property taxes go, yes, that change will be permanent going forward. It doesn't mean we're going to see this $2 million in increase each year. That all plays out based on collections and refunds. As for the payroll deduction liability, that won't affect us going forward because we've now made the adjustment. We've transferred dollars into fund balance that should be in fund balance, not in a liability account. And so now moving forward, especially with the establishment of the internal service fund that we're doing for healthcare, those dollars have been separated out. So this now will become a true reporting at the end of the year. If there is money left in that account, it goes back, whatever is not reserved to surplus or healthcare will go back into the general fund and be reported as fund balance. So this started when the district went to self-insurance. That's what we can point back to, and the money accumulated over the years based upon what was spent. So again, it was a testament to our auditors that we selected, that in the selection process, they looked at former audits and saw this as something that was an anomaly, and then, you know, told us about it. We went through it and they discovered it. So now we will be much more accurately reporting end of year fund balances. So, and it's important to note that surplus for this year, even the FY20 surplus, you know, the district has done a phenomenal job, in a testament to the board in getting Mary on board and doing the cuts that needed to be done, revising the healthcare program to go to self-insurance, to make sure that there was an equitable distribution of costs. And so it truly is a result of both that FY20 budget that I inherited and then the 21 budget, that we truly have been accurate in our expenditures, very accurate in what we've spent. On the revenue side, we were conservative this year. We've outperformed, as you see later, in revenues, but that was our hope, but we didn't know what was going to happen given the economic downturn that occurred in February and March. And then obviously there is an overperformance to date. Since we've gone to self-insurance, we have not experienced those years that they warn about. And knock on wood, that's somewhat being fortunate. It also is because our employees have become such good consumers of their insurance that they're using it properly, and that we're not getting hit with catastrophic costs because people are ahead of the game with their preventative care and maintaining, you know, appointments and making sure they get regular blood draws and all that. So that's one of the things that I say in this next slide. Yes, we had a $19.5 million surplus last year. Let's be honest, that's partially COVID related because we didn't run the bus routes for the last 4 months of the year. That is employment cost on things that we did not do for those last 4 months, for positions we did not need to hire that were open, or going to contract services for other positions that we normally would have to. And then it is the overperformance of the health insurance program for that year. One of the things I noted was that in FY8 or calendar year 18, because remember our insurance program runs on a calendar year, the costs for healthcare were $16 million. The costs in calendar year 19 were $9.8 million. That's a $6 million savings in 1 year. And then the costs for calendar year 20, we have them through November, they're at 95% of what is expected, and we're at $9.1 million. So the performance of the healthcare program now versus when we were fully insured and when there was a very small contribution towards premiums and that was it, really the collaboration between the board and the union on that has helped the district immensely to get to this position. And so that's one of the things we definitely need to reflect upon going forward. Arlen, you had your hand raised?
I did. Two things. One, I think this is another indicator why it was such a brilliant idea to go out for bid on accounting services.
Absolutely.
Because doing that every few years, you tend to catch things like this. The other I wanted to just point out in terms of the long-term view of our finances, back in 2008, when the teachers stepped up, when we had a $30 million hole staring at us over a 5-year period, and the teachers, and we would have needed to have laid off teachers, the teachers stepped up. And believe me, other organizations like even the IFT know about the kind of relationship we have with our teachers, how well we work with them, and how that all came to pass. So that's just another reason why we're where we are today.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And so when we see something like a $19.5 million surplus for FY20, that really lets us know, A, we're doing a nice job with the budgeting. The health insurance has performed very nicely, and it has started to put us in a position that is very favorable to the overall health of the district and ability to both set up the education program as well as something that is going to be rolled out next week to finance is the new 10-year facilities plan. And we can start to take monies and put them towards capital projects so that we can do preventative maintenance and make sure those costs don't skyrocket. We can fund education programs to get the kids caught up without having to be as nervous about the cost, especially when you start to add in $4.1 million in stimulus. And hopefully, we got to think that there is a third wave of stimulus coming based off of what the president-elect has said. And at the numbers it's at, that's going to be another amount of money that, while we're not counting on yet, we do factor into the ability to do some extra staffing, do some extra things to make sure our kids get what they need so that we can get them back to the place they should be. One of the things that you'll hear from the auditors are in our operating funds, we are close to 60% fund balance now because of the restatement and because of the performance last year. We truly are getting into the position that you want to be in, where you get to make decisions like putting money into capital projects and not sacrificing other parts of your program, or putting more money into educational efforts and not having to worry about diminishing returns or diminishing fund balances. So the board has done a great job in putting the district into this position. The union has been a great partner, and that's why a day like today is important, so that you all have the background and then can give us the direction. As we look at then the best news, and this helps us with bond rating, this helps us with all sorts of things going forward, is the district's net position. The district's net position is a compilation of not just what goes into the budget, it is our OPEB, those post-retirement benefits. It's our TRS and IMRF liabilities that the state makes us report now. If you look at the original audit for FY19 had the district at a negative net position of $24 million. Because of the restatement and because of last year's governmental fund surplus of about $16.8 million, we have changed a $24 million negative into a $3.7 million positive in net position. Our bond rating should go up. This is one of the things Mike and I in our call with the bond rating agency talked about. They told us get to 50%. They told us get to a positive operating position. The next time, and we don't know when that'll be, and hopefully we don't need to go out for any money, but when the opportunity arises, this will substantially change. It should substantially change our position. We can't do anything about the negative Illinois rating that goes along with it. Hopefully that wouldn't drag us down, but to see the district go from a negative net position of almost $24 million to a positive net position of $3.7 million in a 2-year period, again, speaks volumes to the work that's been done from the board, the administration, the union, the faith the community put into the referendum campaign that allowed the district to do things that were desperately needed to be done. And this just strengthens our ability to make decisions. It's not like it was 5-6 years ago where you were looking at, barely double-digit fund balance numbers and you were making really hard decisions. We now have the luxury of doing some things, as long as we do it conservatively in the way of looking at sustainability, that we can go ahead and really change the education program moving forward. So looking at where we're at currently this year, and I said it in the email I sent out, I really do hate lots of words on slides, but this presentation kind of lent itself to lots of words on slides instead of pretty graphics. But when you look at this, it gives you a great snapshot of our half-year performance. We had projected total revenues at 122 million. I'm sorry, we had an annual budget of $115 million basically in revenues. We're looking at, based upon the positive collections in property taxes, the CPPRT holding to where it's at, and then state funding, which we projected there might be a small dip in everything but general state aid or EBF. Right now, all of the categoricals have held firm. We're looking at a projected revenue total of $122 million, which would be almost $8 million plus compared to what we had projected. And then we look at expenses. We're running about $3 million better on expenses. Obviously, that is because of not being open, not having all of the programs that we anticipated in the way of stipends, although those are starting to pick up, which is great news for the kids. And then just overall, the variance that it looks like as of right now would be somewhere around $11 million to the positive. Now, again, our health insurance program is running phenomenally. We have only had 4 major claims that hit the stop loss. And so that has been, a remarkable year. And it's been consistent with our last 3 to 4 years, which is about half of what the projected benchmark is. So we know at some point that's going to change a little bit, but luckily we have a surplus because we already had, forget about the money we took from the payroll deduction liability and put into fund balance, that sub fund for health insurance already had a $5 million reserve that we put in there to make sure if we had these off years, we could cover that through the reserve and not through general fund. So we have protected ourselves. But we know that these funds that you see as a projected surplus are not going to be there because this is the opportunity we have. And we're not saying that we're going to spend all of it, but this is our opportunity, much like we did last year, to start ramping up for next year. And so when we look at where we're positive and where we're negative in expenses and in revenues, this is what allows us to forecast and say we're comfortable making some additional expenditures this year. And so just real briefly, you can see we're over half of where we would be in our annual budget. And last year, we were only at 45% at the year to date, and we still met our revenue targets. So we're pretty confident that with property tax collections this year, and so long as there's no major shift in categoricals in the last payment or so, that we're going to do really well in our revenue. One thing I want to point out is in the other financing sources, that is the TIF money. We got a very unexpected voluntary distribution of almost $1 million from the Weston TIF. Which Wheeling had said they planned on making so long as everybody paid their property taxes in that TIF. So to get an extra $1 million was huge for us. And that's something Mike, me and Arlen have had preliminary discussions on. Is that something we transfer into capital projects to make sure, since it was unexpected, that we have money to go towards things that we absolutely need to do. And you'll see in the 10-year plan, our boilers are at the end or beyond the end of their useful life cycle. We have roofs, just like you would expect. We have some other, HVAC repairs. So the total freight on the capital plan is north of $100 million. Remember, that's a 10-year plan. And as long as we do good preventative maintenance over the years, we should never hit that $100+ million mark, but it's going to be a large ticket. So we do have things to plan for. So that's why we talk about maybe transferring something like an unexpected $1 million from TIFs into capital projects. And given the dollars of the surplus, possibly more to set up that capital plan. As far as expenditures go, you see we're down greatly in salaries and benefits. We haven't had to hire the number of student supervisors we thought we'd have to hire. We haven't hired some positions that we were hoping to fill, and yet you see we're up in purchase services. Part of that is because there are positions we can't fill through W-2 employees, so we have to go to contract agencies, but they're vastly needed positions that help our special ed program, mostly nurses, psychologists, OTs, PTs, people like that we need to service our students through their IEPs. So the money more than balances out when we start looking at expenditures. Supplies obviously were up from our projected year to date because we ramped up on some COVID supplies, but in addition, we made the last minute decision to provide all supplies to students, grades pre-K to 8. And so I think that was a great move for our families. It cost us next to nothing compared to what you would think it would to buy in bulk like that. And if we can provide that type of, expense to take away from parents, it just means more that they're able to do for their families at home. And even, they might be able to participate in an extra activity or two. And I just think that was a really great move by the board to waive fees for this year. I think we need to talk about waiving fees for next year because the fees we collect are not a lot of money to our budget, but mean a lot to the parents. And doing supplies on a year-to-year basis and maybe even expanding that a little more, because truly the amount we spend on supplies, to take that away from the parents and make them not have to worry about it so that they didn't have to buy wipes that ended up not being the right wipes and we couldn't use them. You know, that is something that I think is such a great thing to do for the parents in the community and something, given our surpluses, we can do year over year. And so when you look at these numbers here, you see that we're really performing well in revenues. We're doing really well in expenditures. Yes, we're going to have some capital outlay. Yes, we're going to have in that 600 other objects. What that is memberships, PD, conferences, different things through associations. Of course, that's way down this year because nobody's been going off-site to do PD. Nobody's been joining organizations because they get to go to a conference that the cost is included in. But these are things that allow us to do some other things as we move forward, both through this year in advance of next year. So what are the takeaways from those first 2 quarters? We're, as we talked about, we're outperforming our property tax collection estimates. We hoped that would be the case. We looked at 2008 when we had the last real economic crash. The district had collected about 95% of its tax revenue that year, which was still very good considering what 2008 did. But in the end, this year, we're above that right now. We're tracking at about 97% of collections, and the budget had us at about 89.5%. So that's one of the reasons why our revenues are tracking better. We've got increased funding for food service because the federal government extended the Seamless Summer program. And so while our expenses have gone up some, our revenues have matched that and in some cases surpassed that. So there is a little extra money coming in there. The unexpected voluntary distribution from the Wheeling TIF is huge. And then full payment of state revenues. When Mike and I sat in a room and said, there's no way they're going to be able to make all these payments, somehow the state has figured out how to make all those payments to date. Let's hope that these last couple of categorical payments come through. I was just on a webinar the other day with over 200 CSBOs. It's about a 50-50 is what everybody gave it as to whether or not we get full categorical payment this year, and then it's even lower for next year. So that's why we need to talk really about that conservative budgeting moving forward, but still making sure we hit all of the high notes that we need. On the expenditure side, like we talked about, salaries and benefits are down almost $3 million. Yeah, we have some outside agency costs, but overall it's a net positive. Again, the purchase services budget, capital outlay, yes, it's yet to be expended. Mike Frantini and I just talked yesterday because of the cycle on Chromebooks, getting out ahead and ordering right now because it's anywhere from a 3 to 6 month lead time. So that could hit the FY21 budget, or it could hit the FY22, but we can't wait till we would normally order because we might not get those devices till December.
Right.
So we might overspend slightly, but because of the lease cycle, there will be a year where probably FY24 that we're able to take that back out of the budget so it catches up. And there's nothing wrong with that because you can't control production cycles right now. And so again, the benefit of having a nice fund balance is the ability to make decisions like that, roll those forward. And then again, professional development and conferences way down, something that will go up. And even as we talk about some decisions for next year, we know training is going to be needed in order to make sure our staff is fully prepared to meet the challenges that we see going forward. So prognostications for the remainder of this year. We think that everything based upon our Forecast 5 analysis, both with 5Cast Plus and 5Sight, show that property taxes and CPPRT remain on pace. That would be great. EBF, it looks like paid in full. Breakfast lunch revenues will remain strong because those are federal government supported. And then when we start talking about categoricals, as we said, we have some doubts, so we will factor that in. Luckily, EBF and property taxes is our major source of revenue. So if the categoricals, if we miss a payment, it's not going to be detrimental, especially given the positive variance we're on track for. But obviously, we want to collect all of the money we can. And then federal revenues truly appear to be on target. I don't think we're going to see any dip in federal revenues. If anything, we know we already have $4.1 million more that is going to be coming to us. And then if that third stimulus package floats, we're going to see, even more increased revenue that will allow us to do some really great things for kids. And then expenditures are likely to increase. Like we said, stipends are starting to ramp up. Now, stipends are not a huge part of the budget, so that won't have a big impact, but it's good for kids and we need to do it. Hiring more supervisors as we get more kids back into the building. And if, by the grace of God, we can get more kids in for longer time, we'll need those supervisors. Arlen, you had a question?
Actually, I did.
Sorry.
Regarding categoricals, is this another thing that even if it doesn't pay out now, there's a good chance we'll catch up to? That is, the state may delay the payment, but are we worried that they're going to void it completely?
That's a great question, Bill. I mean, in years past, they always caught up.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, given the projected revenue shortfall and the needs of the state, if the government goes ahead and provides some additional funding for state and local governments, I think we'll see those categoricals. If they aren't able to provide the dollars at the amounts that they say, it's going to be an interesting few months as we watch to see what happens. I would hope they would catch up, but it all is going to depend on how much money we get from the feds. Wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yeah, I would say that we should not count on it. If we see a trend where they're skipping categorical payments, I think we should just write those off. If we get them eventually, great. But I wouldn't plan on them because, again, yes, there's the better hope of dollars flowing to the states to fill budget holes, but we've got such a big budget hole. And then also moving forward with the progressive tax not having passed, uncertainty in terms of what kind of appetite there's going to be in the General Assembly to deal with the structural budget problems of the state, a la the last 10 years. I just don't really feel like there's much of, other than an academic exercise, I don't know that there's really much value in assuming that we'll get that at some point.
And we do, I will say, I think the new speaker has an eye towards education that the former speaker did not have. So that gives us hope, but I think Mike's exactly right. If to plug the holes, there's such a huge discrepancy in the state budget that they may have to skip some payments, but by at least holding us harmless at FY20 levels in EBF and as much as they can in all the other payments, I give the state a lot of credit because I didn't think we would be where we're at. And I don't think Mike did either. They truly have done a great job of trying to keep the education funding at least flat. And if we could get that again next year, I think we would all be, taking a deep breath and saying that's great. So,
Arlen, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, all right, apologize. You've got an indicator of more stipends in there.
mm-hmm.
We started a discussion, which we never really completed a couple of years ago, about trying to target stipends to be sure they were being used in the most effective way. So, and I'm not sure where and what's in your thought process about where we need to increase stipends as opposed to it being part of a teacher responsibility. But I would like us to have that discussion at some point.
Yeah, so Arlen, I'll take it, Michael. So if there's an increase in stipends that we're going to be seeing in the second half of the year, my intention is that those are not during the day type of responsibilities. Yes, we have folks that are on that get stipends for lunch supervision and things of that nature.
Yeah.
what I'm talking about here is expansion of programming for kids, likely outside the day. So if we have the opportunity to have some of our staff doing extended day tutoring programs, even if it's remotely based, if we have those different types of intervention type work that people can be doing with kids to then support those things. That's what I'm looking at. There is, pardon me, some things that I think on the professional development side, particularly as we're looking at intervention programming, that we're going to need to train people in. And so those would certainly be things contractually. There's a dollar amount per hour that's attached to those things. So that's what we're looking for in terms of prioritizing of stipends if those dollars go up.
Mike, isn't the stipend issue one that's tied completely to our negotiated contract as well?
Yes, yeah, the rates are very clearly laid out in the contract, and so that those are subjects of collective bargaining. If down the road when we get into that, if the board wants to prioritize conversations around supervision type things and things of that nature, that those are things that would need to be bargained.
Okay.
And Arlen, remember, as far as stipends go, the Sanford Trust that we were given the endowment for, that's providing us an extra $35,000 a year for truly extracurricular stipends, grades 3 through 5. So we're starting to get applications for those. And then we did start a stipend conversation, not related to what Mike said, but with the building principals on what are you offering? Are the offerings appropriate? Are there enough? Are there too little? Last year, and then when COVID hit, that took a sideline. So the stipends that we're going to pay out this year for clubs and activities are still, like, the middle schools have truly brought forward some robust offerings in the last couple of weeks. We're still not going to hit the numbers we spent over the last few years because of sports being down and because the first half of the year just not having the opportunity as teachers worked their rear ends off to make sure that they were providing as much instruction and personal time to students as they could. So I think that is definitely a conversation we need to have. Mike and I in cabinet talked the other day too about trying to lessen the reins on the stipend control that's in the back of the contract to make it so that we could offer more things that are good for kids rather than being narrowly tailored to what's in the back of the contract. So.
Yeah, and the discussion we had years ago was, well, why are we running this particular program? It's not really benefiting the kids. It may be a program a teacher wants to offer, but is it really something that has a real benefit? And I think that was the discussion I was referring to.
Okay.
Right, and we are taking that lens. So as we're looking at those things, broadly speaking, my intention is to be much more targeted, but also agile, right? So like, as we are looking at, where we need to go is not necessarily where we have been. And so, just kind of empowering some of those conversations is absolutely something that we are doing.
Good.
And so just to end those thoughts on the rest of the FY21, again, utilizing those dollars to purchase some materials. We started purchasing Fontes and Pinnell materials for the reading program last year. We didn't complete that purchase for the program. That's something that we've talked about utilizing so that we can hit the ground running in FY22 or school year 21-22. Again, the Chromebooks, other purchases that we will solicit from the departments to say, hey, we've got some extra money. Let's make sure we have stuff in stock, people trained, and items ready to go at the start of next school year. We're going to start having those conversations immediately, knowing where the variance is right now. And then enhanced supplemental summer offerings and extracurricular offerings or beyond the day offerings for next year are going to play a huge part into what we can do to get kids caught up, get kids back in the school community, feeling comfortable about being here so that we really do, assuming everything starts to even out for next year, we can start the year and just go full speed ahead on not just the school day, but those extra day offerings too. So Again, we're not likely to spend at the projected deficit level that we had for FY21. It'll be a smaller variance at the end of the year. I do still think we're going to come out positive because even with some missed categorical payments, if we're looking at a $7-8 million, or I'm sorry, 7 or 8 digit, positive variance, it would be hard to spend all of that between now and June 30th. Although we have some people who probably could figure out some things to spend it on, so we'll make those decisions. Yeah, I know. So forecasting next year's revenues, just to give you a snapshot into how Mike and I are looking at this, we will project property tax revenues again at either the level we have this year or slightly lower because of those refunds that we anticipate giving back. I think what we'll do is look at how we come in for property tax revenues for the year. And if we're at 98, 97%, we could stay where we were this year because I do think that we're going to be looking at, and I've talked to Aris Dalianis, our property tax counsel at Franzik. He's trying to put together their estimates for what they think will be the next 2 to 3 to 4 years in property tax refunds based upon appeals that have been filed, and knowing that that cycle goes anywhere from 1 to 6 years to figure out. I mean, we still get notifications from the assessor saying that they paid out a refund from 2012. I find that to be absolutely ridiculous that we're still paying back people 8 years later, but that's the system we deal with in Illinois. So CPPRT, I imagine will be lower. We typically get those numbers in April or May. So we'll see, and sometimes late August it comes, but usually April or May, they figure that out. So we'll see what that looks like. I will say one of the benefits, and we talked about this on a webinar I was on the other day, the fact that the CPI that was for the end of 2020 is 1.4% is pretty much a miracle. It shows that early in the year, we had really done pretty well, and we just held on for dear life. I mean, when you think back to 4 years ago when we had 0.8 and 0.7, and those were years that nobody saw anything terrible about the economy, but they definitely didn't have, businesses shut down and people working from home. 1.4%, knowing that we're going to get that on top of our property tax base next year is very comforting to know. That will help with those refunds.
Well, and as I'm sure everybody recalls, that the CPI that came out the year after the financial system collapse was 0.1%.
Right.
Right.
So we're nowhere near that kind of doomsday scenario, which is, like Michael said, completely incredible. Yeah.
And in August, people were talking about a negative CPI.
Yeah,
so thinking about going from that to here.
Yeah.
And when we talk about negative CPI, the state never actually resolved what would happen should negative CPI actually ever occur.
Well, and so those of you that are Keynesian in your economic philosophies, I think that's just kind of evidence that stimulus actually does, have a role to play.
Yeah, for sure. And then state revenues, at this point, we're projecting them to be flat, but we could hear anything given the studies that are going to go on between the couple committees over the next few months. It could be less, it could be more. I mean, the Black Caucus did propose increased spending. I think that was great news to everybody. They took it out of the bill, but they're going to study it. It will be interesting to see what we can do to get back on track with the EBF, knowing that it was supposed to be $300 to $350 billion a year added into that so that we could catch up eventually. We'll see where that goes. Categorical payments, I think we're definitely going to end up projecting maybe getting half of our categorical payments. I just don't see how we make that unless, again, the federal government influxes so much money into the states to help with those deficits and those areas that they need help in, that I just don't see how the state can make it. I mean, even the sales tax revenue is down based upon restaurants being closed and shops being closed and people shopping out of state for things. So it, that's an area that I think overall pool of money, they may be able to keep EBF flat. I can't see how categoricals remain intact. But education then to be lesser impacted than other areas. I read a report the other day. They feel that education, from what the governor has said, will be far less impacted by cuts than other areas. He has a strong focus towards education. Again, the new speaker will help with that. But it may be beyond their control. I mean, let's be honest, it's, even though 1.4% CPI, even though unemployment isn't as bad in Illinois as it is in other states, we still are getting hit by the fact that we haven't been able to open up and right decision due to health issues, but it is going to have a negative impact on the economy in some fashion. Good news is federal revenues we see as at least flat, at the worst increased, because we see stimulus. I think we will see a true resurgence of devotion to public education with the First Lady. And I haven't heard, did they pick the Secretary of Education yet?
Yeah, he's the state superintendent in Connecticut.
That's right. Okay. So again, a focus towards education through people that have been educators rather than people that like private school. So, and then again, we think that we're going to see an increase in infrastructure payments or just shoring up payments to state and local governments. We hope that happens. I do think that the overall election results will help do that. We're going to see what 50 votes looks like, and hopefully it means tight reins so that we can get some of this through. And then again, the president-elect just proposed $175 billion in new education funding, 130 of which to go to K-12. So that number is almost 4 times what the last number is. So if we got $4 million, I don't know that they'll be able to stick to just Title I allocations. They might have to go everybody. That's still a ton of money to put towards education, which would really help us go in and truly do the recovery that Mike's talking about. So the last slide here is just, I think, what we're here for today, and I'll let Mike take it over from here. But if there are any other questions about the budget, let me know. If you have any questions offline, send me an email. But I think we're in good shape, and that's largely due to the work you all have put in over the last number of years and Mike's focus on the appropriateness of programs and being in the right place. So
nice presentation, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to add just a couple more things about the spring. And we're still trying to get our bearings to see how likely it is that we're going to be able to do some of these things. But with vaccinations, staff vaccinations coming, it seems like even within the past 24 hours that Cook County Department of Public Health is starting to have a little bit more clear focus on rolling these things out. I'll be honest, I don't know if everybody saw the news that even as Secretary Azar, soon to be former secretary, I guess he resigned, Azar.
He retracted that.
Okay. Anyway, said that they were releasing all of the available doses. Apparently, all the available doses had already been released.
Yes.
So there's that. In any event, if we're on track for getting shots in arms of our staff in 1B in that month of February, I've asked the cabinet to begin planning for and really taking a hard look at what are our options for beginning to ramp up time, that kids are in person. Particularly our younger students, because as we are getting more certainty, and quite frankly, we're getting more usable research and data about schools' ability, which quite frankly has been very good to manage, COVID infections and such, that I really am very, I want to get kids as close to back up to full day as possible before the end of the school year. In a perfect world, we could see a situation where at least our younger grades, K1, 2, 3, we could get them back in full day like right after spring break. Now, I'm not promising that at all, but that's what we are starting to plan for and are really hoping for. Now, part of that is going to mean, particularly on the transportation side, we might need to be thoughtful about how our bus routes are running, because we still are going to want to socially distance buses. And so, we're not going to be running buses at full capacity. So there could be increases in transportation costs because of that. And then also just in general, as I said before, the looking at a steady increase in the intervention programming, even outside the school day, that we're going to try and offer. So, I am looking at a lot of different ways to be able to leverage our projected, balance to be able to reinvest those dollars back into the educational program. And then obviously, as I've already shared with the board in a couple of my weekly updates, the new federal stimulus that's coming in, I'm targeting all of those dollars towards direct service into the educational program. So between offering an extremely robust summer school program, all the way through additional staff for next year to really target learning intervention and really, shoring up our staff to really be able to meet the needs of kids, because we know there's going to be a lot of catch up, so to speak, that needs to happen. And then finally, extended day programming throughout the course of next year. So we are not leveraging those funds for stuff. We're leveraging those funds for direct educational service programming. So with that, I guess really we just wanted to try and have some conversation around, even with the brightening picture that we see in front of us, knowing that next year, as Michael said, really is a recovery year. It has to be. This year has been about surviving and managing. Next year is going to be about recognizing the massive disruption that has occurred in the educational experience of our kids, despite our best efforts. I think we've done a good job mitigating it, but it is not, we didn't prevent it. And knowing that we are going to need to, in many cases, move heaven and earth to get our kids where they need to be, so that they can continue in the path that they would have had there not been a global pandemic. Around that, I think we've got some more tailwinds than headwinds at this point, which is nice. But we also wanted to be cognizant of what the board's comfort level is with the bottom line. And so with that, if there's any questions or just Phil, I'll send it back over to you to manage the discussion however you choose.
Okay, I think it's be helpful, Mike, if you give the board an idea conceptually of what the frame of negativity might be in terms of a 1 year negative budget. What do you think we're looking at? We're looking at a couple million? Are we looking 5 million? What's the anticipation that you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think that given the brightening revenue picture, if we were to need to go into any kind of a negative budget kind of scenario, I think it's extremely reasonable to say that we would be able to cap that at between 4 and 5 million. And Michael, jump in here if you're kind of on a different wavelength here. The vast majority of the increased expenditure that we would see would be people, because again, that's the biggest part of our budget in the first place. But the need that we're going to have to put support on the ground in schools, math interventionists, literacy interventionists, just different types of staff that will be able to be supportive of teachers being able to really target and differentiate within their classrooms, just extra hands on deck to be able to augment those programs. So that's where I see that biggest impact. Now, to be honest, this is also something that we are not looking to create a structural deficit. The reality is that we need these people, particularly next year. That doesn't mean they stay, right? And that is always something that, can get a little touchy. Because once you give something, it's hard to take it away. But we're just going to be very honest with our staff and with our community. Say these are extraordinary circumstances, and so we cannot not do this if we are going to really support our kids. And where we see things that we have, determined are of value to continue, well, there's opportunity costs, right? So if we're saying that we want that these extra supports are things that we want to make permanent, that's fine. But where are we stepping back from, right? We can't continue to just add. And so I will tell you that there are plenty of, from my estimation, there are plenty of very good conversations that we can be having about where priorities lie. And so just because we've been doing something for the past 20 years doesn't necessarily mean we should continue to do those things.
Right.
And it's nothing personal. It's nothing about, just not valuing what we have in place. It's about targeting limited resources to where it needs to go. And that ain't easy. We know that those conversations would not be easy. And, that's just reality. But for the school year 21-22, it's an extraordinary circumstance. And I think we have not just a professional obligation, but quite frankly, a moral obligation to be making sure that we are putting the resources in place to be as supportive as we can for our teachers because they have a heck of a job in front of them. So 3 to 5 million, I think, Michael, at worst, and again, not setting up a structural deficit, truly something that would be a 1 year, overshoot, and then get back into a balanced position.
And remember, part of this is born out of a conservative revenue estimate. If revenues come in better, then that structural deficit goes down like it is this year. So I think that's the key to, in a normal year, we might not be as conservative in revenues when we have more consistency, we have more knowledge about what's going to happen refund wise, all of those things. But we are, to a certain extent, slightly creating a deficit because we're being conservative, but we have to. Otherwise, we'll spend at a normal level and they'll cut our knees out. And now we will have a major structural deficit for this year. So I just think it's partially conservative and it's partially reality. Stacey?
Yeah, so that was sort of my question. So this anticipated negative budget for 21-22 is based on property taxes revenue being at or below what we're currently seeing. That does include the 4 million in stimulus we anticipate getting, but does not include any potential third wave of stimulus?
Correct. If we find out about a third wave, that'll go in. As far as the second wave, that's being able to be spent through, Mike, is it September of 22 or September of 23? It spans
September 22.
It ends up spanning essentially 3 fiscal years when you think about it. So we won't have all $4 million in the FY22 budget, but we'll have, a good portion of it in FY22 because that'll be the longest period. But right, it is conservative estimates on property taxes. It's what the real numbers we have on stimulus and what we believe we can spend in that given FY22 year. Some of that will go, if they start giving us that money, some of that will go in FY21. So because we might start some summer programs that begin prior to June 30th. So right, part of the deficit is because of the conservativeness. Part of it is just we're going to hit real numbers on expenditures And so that's where there could be a slightly larger variance than would normally be anticipated.
Stacy, did you have a follow-up with Michael?
Me?
Yeah,
No, I'm good.
okay.
Thank you.
I think I'd like to separate the two things here. One, just conceptually, does anyone have a problem looking at a limited 1-year time frame in which we would need to go into a negative situation for the express purpose of getting our children caught back up again? The recovery is really the important thing here.
I think, Phil, you and Mike hit it on the head with we continuing to use the word recovery. And I think as we message this going forward, Mike, you're right. This is going to be something we're going to be putting out there and bringing back. But I think also, in terms of being comfortable with the deficit, what makes me comfortable is, in my mind, I'm spending that deficit's coming out of the found money that we basically have that we weren't anticipating having anyway. The $8.7 million that was never projected in any annual or 5-year plan. As long as we are not committing to a permanent revenue, a permanent expenditure stream, a 1-year spending would, in my mind, shouldn't be a problem and is, as Mike said, morally necessary.
Jessica, any initial thoughts on that? You need to unmute.
Sure. I couldn't
There you go.
unmute there for a second. I think, obviously we've shown ourselves to be very careful with the funds that we do have, and careful in planning for things that we know will come and things we don't know will come in the next few years. I think that's wholly separate from what we have right now. I'm comfortable with us saying it's a moral obligation. I think it's also just our duty as educators to put every cent possible that we can into the recovery for next year. I think we're going to see children with deficits that we didn't anticipate. And not
I think we lost Jessica.
Yeah. Jess, we've lost your audio.
it would be quite a bit
There we
more,
go.
given what I think we're going to be seeing next year based on what our kids have gone through this year. So yeah, I'm comfortable where we're planning, where we're headed, where we're planning right now.
Okay, Deb? Go ahead.
Sorry, couldn't unmute here. Yeah, everything, it's a recovery year. I am fully comfortable, just knowing what my kids are going through. The kids are going to need it, and we're here to educate our kids. So we've got to do what we can to help them out. So I am fully comfortable with a recovery year of deficit spending.
Okay. Stacy G?
So I'm comfortable with the additional expenditures. Absolutely. I concur with everyone who's spoken so far that, additional resources will need to be focused on most, if not all, of our students and staff as a result of what's taken place. To say I'm comfortable with deficit spending, probably, I can't get those words to come out of my mouth, but I trust that Dr. Connolly and Michael have reviewed in great detail those areas in which we can cut back to offset the additional spending, and if it results in a deficit as a result of what are the obligations we have to the board to our community, then I will accept that.
Stacy,
I had to practice those words too, just so you know.
Right.
Yeah. I'm Keynesian in my national economic. I'm not so much, I'm firmly in belief of local and state governments don't get to run deficits just willy-nilly. So,
Stacy Allen?
So I think this is the first step in recognizing we are heading into some uncharted waters in a time of education. I mean, I think that it's pretty transparent is that our kids are going to come back in different places and need different resources, and not just for the short term, for probably some of them for the long term. I mean, I think there are a lot of unknowns. I think this is step one. I don't know that anybody is ever comfortable using the words deficit spending or any of those things, but these are recovery in uncertain and uncharted waters. And so I think this is step one. I think going back and revisiting it will be important, but I think that we need to recognize we are going to be in a place, and our students are going to be in a place for a while that is not normal, and we're going to need to recognize the water that we're swimming in and address things accordingly. I will say real quick, I love what I think is impactful is acknowledging the stress on our families and looking at places that we can be helpful. The school supplies thing, the fees thing, not just for the families that are used to asking for help, but the families that are not used to having to ask for help, and the families who are not used to needing help, being able to meet them where they are and being able to take some of the burden and the stress when you think about how am I going to buy school supplies for my kids? How am I going to pay those fees? I'm used to having the money to do it all the time. And for some reason now we went from 2 really good incomes to 0. And so I think being able to alleviate that, and I think both the budget deficit and some of the other steps that we've taken give us the point to be able to meet our families where they are and then address that journey from there.
Okay, thank you, Stacey. We'll go now to our second elder statesman, Mr. Gould. Your comments on deficit spending for a single year?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. So generally speaking, I would be adverse to deficits. In general, have been over the years. Sat here when we had to make crucial, tough cuts to balance our budget, in part because we were adding programs prior to that we really never evaluated in terms of their efficacy. The full day program that was costing us just under $1 million a year. Now, I think it was at Homes that we just didn't evaluate year to year to see if it was really helping the kids. I like what Mike said about targeted, and I like what Mike said about not a structural increase. And I think the key for me is to be sure that that is well communicated to our community, that they understand 2 things. One, we're going to evaluate what we're doing. We're not just adding bodies and saying it's going to help our kids, but there'll be a goal at the end of each program. We'll measure each program as we do now with other programs. Yes. And it's not going to add to a structural deficit. And that puts us in a position of measuring what we're doing, acknowledging that some things won't work and we may have to change them or revise them, which doesn't always happen in education. So I like the pieces that Mike has laid out. I would support a deficit in the $3 to $5 million range. I would hope it would not be much more than that.
Right. Mike, as a follow-up to that, in terms of specific items where we might be looking at having prioritization, I think it might be helpful, and perhaps not at today's session, to actually put together the list of potential areas and items that you may be looking at. And that way we can actually respond without a helter-skelter type of approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. And so, as I noted in kind of what we're envisioning for the use of the next wave of stimulus dollars, that list is being generated. And so that wouldn't be a problem at all. And again, just to kind of sketch out, even right now, we're talking about math intervention, literacy interventionists. So, at the school level, I think we absolutely need to be targeting dollars towards our gifted and talented programming, which is inadequate. Yep. And then just broadly speaking, really looking at the intervention programming that needs to occur in many ways. So yes, we will absolutely really have a very detailed recovery plan of how this is going to shake out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that that would be something that you won't see it on Thursday for the January board meeting, but we will be presenting in the February board meeting our draft staff plan for the coming year. And so it all kind of comes together, because particularly around the staffing conversations, if we're going to increase staff in these very targeted ways, we need to get out in the marketplace. We are still very much in a situation where there are teaching shortages. Also with our summer programming, and I really want to be aggressive with our summer programming, opportunities. We also have to recognize the fact that our staff are going to be exhausted. And so I cannot force our staff to be, teaching in the summer. So, we may very well need to be hiring outside, people to do our summer programming. So once again, getting in the marketplace to try and get those positions filled is going to be important. And so we can't do that in April, right? Like we need to start to be able to build that up, sooner rather than later. So I will come to this board in February with a robust recovery plan outline, and be as specific as possible.
Arlen?
I'm just wondering if there's any way we can actually think about, depending on the federal dollars that come in the third wave, actually extending the school year. I understand there's all kinds of implications in that, but as opposed to just jumping right into a summer school program, possibly extending the school year, because the kids are with her. If the teachers would agree to some kind of a program where we pay them to do that, there's a continuity there that you can't capture going to summer school.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the ability to do that for summer 21 would be quite difficult, because number one, we don't necessarily, we don't know when a third stimulus is going to pass. I mean, the hope would be it would pass very quickly, but we can't. They still need to figure out how to get over that 60 threshold in the Senate. And so that whether they do it through budget reconciliation or whatever mechanism they can do it to try and get it through, we don't know how long that's going to take.
Yeah.
The other thing is that is a bargaining issue.
Right.
So if we were to do something like that, I could absolutely see us, having conversations with DEA. But I would say that would be a more realistic thing to look at for summer 22. I just logistically don't see how we would be able to get that structured successfully, and have the buy-in in summer 21. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that in the Black Caucus, in the omnibus bill,
yes.
They were pushing for just that, to actually extend the school year by, I think, 15 days. And that was pulled out of the bill. And I think there's, Bill, help me out here. I think there is going to be a commission to study it. But the dollar amounts, just on a daily basis, for extended school days is, Michael, each day is about what for us?
We do not have that figure, but I will get it for you. I can tell you it's large given the amount of staff that it is.
Sure.
And Mike, to finish up on your comments, yes, that was in the bill. All of the funding mechanisms, because they talked about more money, for example, for EBF and all that. All of that was pulled out of the bill to be going to the EBF committee that looks at that.
Right.
But one of the discussions that we did have at EdRed was, the state thinks that if you did that, the teachers would accept a day per, just accept the per diem amount extended across. And I'm looking at Mike's face as I'm saying this. That's not likely to happen on top of it. So whatever Michael tells us the cost on a daily basis is, assume it's going to be noticeably higher once we have to negotiate, or once any district has to negotiate it.
I don't even know that I like a per diem. I mean, to be honest with you, there's a debate about, is it worth more for more days? Is it worth the same? Is it worth less? I mean, nobody's downplaying what teachers do at all. And this last year and a half has shown the incredible amount of work they do. but to go dollar for dollar, hour for hour would be ridiculously expensive to do. I mean, there's got to be some give and take to that.
And I think the other thing I want to kind of just note is that, we also don't want to get into a situation, and I'm not trying to reduce this at all, the impact of this, but we don't want to get into a situation where we're trying to take out a fly with a bazooka. I think we do need to be very targeted to the needs of students. And so some students may honestly need to have that level of extended time.
Yeah.
And those are the types of things that we then really target in our summer programming. The direction I've been meeting individually with principals and over the last couple of days, and we'll continue that through the next week or so. And one of the messages that I'm sending to them is that start identifying your kids that we need, right now, that we need to invite into very specific programs for the summer. And we'll just continue to build that. So we'll have that kind of by invitation programming, and then we'll have the open programming that we're envisioning as well. So, there are other ways, than extending the school year for everybody that we can get at some of this.
Okay.
Mike, can I just ask
Yes,
on
go
that
ahead.
point, aside from extended school year or summer programming, is there a thought to continuing that 2-week math and reading boot camp that we did this past summer?
Yeah. I think what I want to do is to really try and offer as many things as we are able to. So kind of have the boot camp kind of construct, which I think went very well. But then in addition to that, have, those very intervention-based kind of skill targeted things. Now, again, the one X factor that I can't control is availability of staff. Right. So, it is, I would love to throw everything at the wall and hopefully it sticks, but we may have to pick and choose depending on how we can actually, staff. But no, yeah, that is absolutely something that is my intention would be to continue doing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Are you fine with what we've discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of want to note that inherent in all of this is the fact that we will continue to identify efficiencies that we can do, and if there's an area of cheese that we need to move, to kind of try and get the bottom line as balanced as possible, we will do that. We will pursue those things.
Okay. So our next meeting then is next Thursday. We do have a finance committee meeting ahead of time. At 6:15, Mike, is that?
Yes. And unfortunately, we're still going to be remote. I was holding out hope that we were going to be one of the areas that the governor would have taken us out of Tier 3 mitigations, but alas, we were not. So we will still be remote for Thursday's meeting. Just because of capacity issues. So the hope would be is that we will be back in the room for the February board meeting.
That would be good.
Yes, it would.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for their availability and participation this morning. Michael, thank you so much for the presentation. Mike, of course, working with Michael on that was most appreciated. For all the staff that tuned in this morning, we appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday morning as well, and of course my colleagues. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Deb. If you would take the roll call, please. You need to unmute yourself, Deb. There we go.
Okay, I'll say more to Phil,
Aye.
Stacey Ellen,
Yes.
myself, yes, Arlen,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Stacy,
Yes.
and Jessica.
Yes.
Okay, we are
We
adjourned.
stand adjourned. Thank you all so much. See you.
For everybody who actually has a long weekend, enjoy it.
Be safe.
All right.
Well,
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike Frantini, for
Thanks,
keeping
everyone.
us going here.
You.